Weight loss and diabetes drugs have captured Wall Street's imagination of late. Goldman Sachs projects these drugs could serve 15 million people by 2030. But what does the demand picture actually look like for all of the hype out there? We have been talking about this a lot. And Yahoo Finance's Anjalee, Khemlani, and Brooke DiPalma have been digging into it. Anjalee, let's start with you. So where do we stand right now with usage of these drugs?
Well, let's start off actually with just what they do, right? We know that they are weight loss and diabetes drugs. Majority of the drugs out there, of the three, Novo Nordisk's Ozempic and Eli Lilly's Mounjaro, are actually diabetes drugs. And only Novo Nordisk's Wegovy is actually approved for weight loss. But what does that all mean? Of these new formulas of GLP-1s, that's what they're called, they actually have just been really spectacular at providing record weight loss. And that's why they're so popular. As you can see on your screen, Ozempic really taking the lead there with $3.1 billion alone for the last quarter. Meanwhile, Wegovy over $1 billion, and Mounjaro just getting to that billion mark, making them already blockbuster drugs. And this is just for use in about 1% of the population. Novo Nordisk's data does show that a majority of the users are still diabetes users. So even though we're hearing so much about what the potential is for weight loss, it is still being used by a largely diabetes population, in large part because of the restrictions on insurance, the fact that there's production issues, so there's a shortage. So all of these are creating barriers essentially for broader uptake. And so that's sort of where things stand right now, is not the frenzy that you're necessarily hearing, but more of a slow ramp up, if you will.
And Brooke, turning to you, we can see how this could mean big profits for drug makers, but how does this also impact other companies like restaurant chains?
Yeah, Josh. Well, the drug doesn't necessarily stop you from eating entirely. It just really curbs your appetite. It makes you feel fuller for longer, and that can impact foot traffic at companies, or rather chains, that typically do cater to customers looking for a quick snack or beverage. Jack in the Box and Taco Bell, owned by Yum Brands, are often visited by snackers in the early afternoon or late night after 9 p.m. We could see a drop in traffic then. Coffee giants like Starbucks and Dutch Bros typically cater to visits that are not necessarily tied to consuming a meal. Half of visits are not tied to consuming a meal there, so they too could feel the impact. And what exactly people choose to eat could change as well. That would impact more fast casual chains like Olive Garden, Texas Roadhouse, or Chili's. Consumers could order less appetizers or desserts. And once again, those are consumers that are taking the drugs. And Stifel analyst Chris O'Call said in a note that if 25% of customers are using weight loss drugs and all of them choose not to get an appetizer, that could lower sales by roughly 1 to 2%. But Anjalee, 25% of customers doesn't seem too realistic in the near future, does it?
That's right. Going back to that 1% that are currently on. And we're talking about, to the Goldman Sachs note earlier that Julie mentioned, 15 million is nothing compared to the 100 million people that are, allegedly impacted by obesity right now. So that's a huge market that could potentially be impacted. And just a small portion is what we're talking about, especially by 2030. Important to point out what you said earlier as well, which is, this drug doesn't necessarily curb your appetite, though there are some studies about curbing addictions. It just makes you feel fuller for longer because it slows down the appetite. And that's the only thing that this drug does. And it helps to stimulate insulin production. So key to remember what this actually does versus what it's being used for. But I think that's all in context, Brooke. We talk about what this potential impact could be to especially the food and beverage industry. It feels like they're already sort of been working on stuff related to maybe healthier eating, right?
Yeah, Anjalee, some of the stocks that we've seen get hit the hardest in the last month, 1 to 2 months, is really food and beverage giants like PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, as well as snacking giant Hershey's. All of them saying that they've been evolving their portfolio strategy to already meet a healthier consumer lifestyle. Hershey's back in 2021 introduced the 0-calorie and protein bar options. PepsiCo flagged portion control and the popularity for mini canned sodas among consumers in July of 2020. And most recently, we've heard from Coca-Cola on its earnings call that it feels like it's well positioned to provide consumers with choice. And so really at the end of the day here, it's really important to note that the larger implications of these weight loss drugs are still widely unknown.
Anjalee and Brooke, thank you both.